Hey there, this is Out Motorsports. My name is Jake, and this is a Lexus that they're not making anymore. This is a 2020 Lexus GS350 with all-wheel drive. Lexus ceased production of these cars back in August or so, and even though you can't buy one after the 2020 model year, they sent me one to take a look at anyway. The Lexus GS lasted through 4 generations, starting back in the 1990s, and was a favorite of a lot of consumers for a long time. So let's take a look at what the Lexus GS is and isn't, talk about why the popularity kind of declined in recent years, and then we'll talk about what's going to fill the void of the Lexus GS in Lexus's lineup. All right, so let's talk about what the GS is and isn't for the 2020 model year. As with all Lexus GS sedans from the beginning of the model run back in the 1990s, the Lexus GS is the brand's sort of mid-size sedan. You've got the smaller ES and IS down below the GS line, and then you've got the LS bookending things at the very top as kind of the Mac Daddy of executive sedans and cruisers. So the GS is kind of this mid-size sedan meant to compete with the Audi A6, the BMW 5 Series, the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, and it has, and in some ways it still does. The GS has always been a rear-wheel drive based platform. It started life as a Toyota Aristo back in the 90s and has evolved since then, but here in the United States, the only cars that still share this new N platform are the current Lexus IS and the Lexus RC Coupe. Every other Lexus product has moved on to other platforms by now, and most of them were never rear drive biased in the first place, but the GS is still rear drive based in 2020. This model that I have comes with all-wheel drive, which is of course going to spin the front and rear wheels, but this is a rear drive biased system. It is a 70-30 torque split rear to front with a center transfer case. It is not a slip and grip system. This is a full-time all-wheel drive setup. Lexus claims it can lock the differential in the middle to provide 50-50 power distribution front to rear if you need it. In years past, the GS came with a variety of engines. Back in the day, it came with the 2JZ Straight 6, which was one of the best engines from Toyota's wheelhouse back then. That came also in the Supra, as well as the Lexus SC, the Lexus IS. And then you could also get a variety of V8s over the years, which were also very well known for being reliable, putting out good power and torque, and being fairly fun to drive. Lexus, in this final iteration, in this 2020 model year, only offers the 3.5-liter corporate V6. That's found in a lot of Lexus products and some Toyotas, including the Camry, the Avalon, and even the Tacoma pickup truck. So if you own a Tacoma, you can say that your Tacoma has a Lexus motor in it. The 2020 GS only has that 3.5. Earlier GSs of this generation could be had as a hybrid or with a smaller 4-cylinder or even with a 5-liter naturally aspirated V8. That was called the GSF. Now, like I said, Lexus is going to stop selling the GS350 at the end of this model year. They've already stopped production back in the summer of 2020. So let's talk about what the GS350 is not, and that might help put all of this into perspective. So like I said, this 2020 Lexus GS is the final model year of the GS lineup. This is the 4th generation of the GS. This car first came out in 2012 and was facelifted for the 2015 model year. Lexus has really not done a lot to change it since then, and it kind of shows. Styling-wise, I think this is a fine design. You do get more classic rear-wheel drive proportions given the car's platform and drivetrain layout. Size-wise, this is more or less the same size as the current Lexus ES sedan. But beyond the styling, which I think has aged fairly well, there's a lot about this GS that feels like a throwback to a simpler, earlier time that is fine. It just doesn't stay competitive in 2020. Technology-wise, this car feels fairly dated. And more importantly, drivetrain-wise, this car also feels a little bit dated. You do have this 3.5-liter V6, but if you want the all-wheel drive GS350, you only get a 6-speed automatic transmission. You can get an 8-speed automatic transmission if you go for rear-wheel drive only. And like I said, moving to the technology front of things, this Lexus goes back to a time where good infotainment didn't mean Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Yes, this is a 2020 model year, but you can't get either of those things in this Lexus. So that all begs the question, why wasn't this car updated? Well, Lexus also has the front-wheel drive based ES sedan. It comes as an ES250 or an ES350. That sedan is wildly popular, and at this point is basically the same size as the GS. It is a little bit lighter than the GS. It is priced similarly to the GS once you get a bunch of options added to make it equipped more or less like this. And if you don't want all those options, it's cheaper. It's on a newer platform with more advanced safety, more advanced driver technology, and everyone buys those. Lexus sold 30,000 plus of them in 2019, and they only sold 3,000 of the GS in the same model year. So clearly they've decided to put all of their eggs into the ES basket, and you've still got the IS below it and the LS above it. And Lexus has confirmed that a new IS will be coming for the 2021 model year. So hopefully we'll get to sample that a little bit later, and they'll bring that in line with the rest of the lineup to have 3 nice sedans, small, medium, large. And really, there's not much need for anything beyond that because Americans' tastes have overwhelmingly shifted to crossovers for several reasons, many of which I don't particularly understand. So, with all that said, let's get behind the wheel of this GS and see how it is to drive. Because, yes, it might be a little outdated, but that doesn't mean it's a bad car. All right, so driving the 2020 Lexus GS350 all-wheel drive. Like I said, this is an old car by new car sales standards. This car was introduced in 2011 and first sold in the US in 2012. And Lexus did do a bit of an update in 2015, but the current everything in here is 5 years old. They have not really updated anything since. And like I said, the biggest area where it shows through is in the technology. The first thing you'll notice is the infotainment system has the Lexus remote touch mousy thing that you move around to select items on a screen. It's not a touch screen, which honestly I'm okay with for the sake of driver safety, but you cannot have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. And again, I'm okay with that if the built-in system is easy to use and pretty intuitive, but it isn't and it's not. And this remote touch mouse really doesn't help things. Lexus has moved to a touchpad in newer models that they claim is a little bit easier to use. This is the first Lexus that I've spent time in that's a modern Lexus, so I can't really say either way, but remote touch was updated for a good reason. So this is not the most modern system, it's not the best system, and you can tell. Beyond the infotainment system, of course, there's plenty about this car that's totally fine. It does not feel that dated in a lot of ways. Like I said, the drivetrain is a 3.5 liter V6 that is shared with a bunch of Lexus products and some Toyotas. The engine itself is really pretty good, and it makes a really good noise actually when you get on it. But the rest of the car doesn't really back up that kind of sporty growl that it'll make, but you can hear it. Pretty nice noise, and it moves out with respectable authority. This V6 makes 311 horsepower and about 280 pound-feet of torque in the GS. It's tuned a little bit differently based on each application. And like I said, if you get the all-wheel drive like this car has, you must have a 6-speed automatic, not an 8-speed automatic that you find with other rear or front drive only Lexus vehicles. Now this GS does have a sport mode and it's got paddle shifters for the transmission. Frankly, I just don't care about any of it. The car itself, the character of the car itself, otherwise just doesn't require any of that. You get no real joy out of putting this car in sport mode versus leaving it in normal mode. All right, we're in sport mode. Let's whip a U-turn and hit it. Oh, sport mode does some downshiftting on its own for you. There we go. That was okay. It wasn't really sporty per se. If this were the rear drive GS and you could try to get it to hang the tail out or something, awesome. That could be fun for a brief minute or longer on a skid pad or some back roads. The all-wheel drive GS with this traction control and all the other electronics going on in here, it's not fun to do something like that. I'm gonna push this and put it back in normal mode. It's just a nice cruiser, and I don't think it needs to be anything but that. And if you want that in 2021 form, on a more updated platform, you've got the ES too. GS here is not really sporty, it's not really a standout, but in GS eras gone by, they were rear drive only. All-wheel drive was not a thing that we had conceptualized as a marketing tool yet. You had that 2JZ, superb straight six. And if you wanted something bigger than that, you either had a 4-liter or a 4.3-liter V8 that was also pretty superb. Those cars became very popular among the enthusiast crowd who liked the concept of the IS, but wanted something a little bit bigger. Lexus is just responding to what consumers want and what the market indicates. And you know, you don't have to have rear-wheel drive to have a car that can go, stop, and turn well and ride well in the process. It's definitely a little more old school interior-wise. You still have a CD player front and center, highlighted with this kind of strip of brushed aluminum. I will say one standout feature is the Mark Levinson sound system in this car. It is 17 speakers with a 7.1 channel surround sound effect and something like 835 watts of power. It is tremendous. Mark Levinson is the premium brand that Lexus has partnered with forever at this point. All of their sound systems are pretty good. The one in this GS in particular is really quite astonishing. It's interesting too, Lexus PR is probably gonna hate the fact that I'm starting this sentence with my grandmother, but my grandmother on my dad's side, her final car after years and years of Lincoln Town cars was a 2003 or so Lexus ES330. But where she lived in Arizona had these sidewalks that were kind of sloped between the street and the curb. It wasn't a hard, 90-degree angle. She had this bad habit in her Lexus ES of talking while driving and kind of just drifting up onto the curb and drifting back down. And I only mention that because my mom brought it up as a funny story when I said I had a Lexus coming for the week. What's interesting is that this GS smells exactly like her ES did 17 or 18 years ago. So just a funny little anecdote. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2020 Lexus GS350 with all-wheel drive. Thank you so much for coming along today. As always, if you like what we're up to, please take a second, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and if you're looking for a written review of this GS350 all-wheel drive, it will be posted at outmotorsports.com and linked in the description below. Until next time, please drive safe and be well. We'll see you soon.